Hello friends. So now we will talk about the another process area of configuration management, that is another process area of CMM, that is configuration management. So configuration management is a required process area for CMM level 2 and for all subsequent levels as well. So there are some specific goals and practices when we talk about configuration management. So the most important goal of configuration management is to establish the baselines. The other important goal is to track and control changes, and the third goal is to establish the integrity. Then there are some practices within this goal. So the practices in establishing the baseline. So the practices in establishing the baselines are to identify configuration items, then establish a configuration management system, and then to create or release baselines. मतलब जब हम baselines establish करते हैं तो जो सबसे तीन इम्पॉर्टेंट प्रैक्टिसेस हम लोग फॉलो करते हैं, उसमें जो पहली प्रैक्टिस है वो ये कि हम कॉन्फ़िगरेशन आइटम्स को आइडेंटिफाई करते हैं. See, that is the most important step also, where you want to identify the configuration items. Then you try to establish the configuration management system. The configuration management system से related जो भी environment and everything you require, you try to establish that configuration management system. And the third practice is to create or release baselines. जो भी आपने बेसलाइन क्रिएट किए, आइडेंटिफाई किए, उन बेसलाइंस को आप रिलीज कर देते हैं. जो सेकंड स्पेसिफिक गोल है हमारा कॉन्फ़िगरेशन मैनेजमेंट में, दैट इज़ टू ट्रैक एंड कंट्रोल चेंजेस. So in track and control changes, the first practice is to track change request. जो भी आपके चेंज रिक्वेस्ट आएंगे, you first track that. Track the change request, then to control configuration items. In the second practice, in track and control changes, you control configuration item. ट्रैक एंड कंट्रोल कॉन्फ़िगरेशन चेंजेस में हम ट्रैक क्या करते हैं, कंट्रोल चेंज रिक्वेस्ट ट्रैक करते हैं और कॉन्फ़िगरेशन आइटम्स को कंट्रोल करते हैं. इन द थर्ड स्पेसिफिक गोल we try to establish the integrity. We try to establish the integrity for all configuration items. So within this goal, there are again two practices. One is to establish configuration management records. Whatever configuration management records you have, you try to establish those records. We will see these practices in details. And then the second practice is to perform configuration audits. कॉन्फ़िगरेशन से रिलेटेड जो ऑडिट्स आपको परफॉर्म करनी है, यू ट्राई टू परफॉर्म दोज ऑडिट्स. सो व्हाट इज द पर्पस ऑफ कॉन्फ़िगरेशन मैनेजमेंट? तो जो सबसे इम्पॉर्टेंट एस्पेक्ट है कॉन्फ़िगरेशन मैनेजमेंट का, वो है कि आप जो आपके वर्क प्रोडक्ट्स हैं, यू ट्राई टू establish and maintain the integrity between your work products. Now, for establishing the integrity between your work products, what are the options you have? इसके लिए आप पहले कॉन्फ़िगरेशन को आइडेंटिफाई करते हैं, कॉन्फ़िगरेशन कंट्रोल करते हैं, कॉन्फ़िगरेशन से रिलेटेड ऑडिटिंग करते हैं, कॉन्फ़िगरेशन से रिलेटेड जो वेरियस स्टेटस हैं उनकी आप अकाउंटिंग रखते हैं. तो वी डिस्कस्ड अबाउट द पर्पस एंड द गोल्स ऑफ कॉन्फ़िगरेशन. Now what this configuration management involves? Basically it involves the identification of selected work product which you want to configure. तो जो भी आपके वर्क प्रोडक्ट्स हैं, you select those work products and identify the configuration of those work products, and then you try to compose the baseline. You try to create a base for that. You try to create a baseline for all your configuration items. The second important aspect in configuration management is to control changes to the configuration item. You try to control those changes. Then you try to provide specification to build products from the configuration management system. The next step is to maintain the baseline, maintain the integrity of baseline. जो भी आपने baselines create किए हैं, you try to maintain the integrity of your baseline. And once everything is done, you keep on auditing the configuration management changes and also provide the accurate status and current configuration data to developers. Developers, whatever stakeholders you have, you try to provide, you try to update them with the current status of your configuration items. Now, जो वर्क प्रोडक्ट्स हम कॉन्फ़िगरेशन आइटम्स में कंसीडर करते हैं, ये वर्क प्रोडक्ट्स होते हैं जो कि आप कस्टमर को डिलीवर करते हैं. यू डिलीवर दोज वर्क प्रोडक्ट टू द कस्टमर्स. These could also include some internal work products, some reusable components, maybe the third party controls or tools or services that you have opted for in the project. Now, if we talk about the work product, so what are the possible options that we can include in our work product? So the examples of work product that we could place under the configuration management includes items like the product specifications, code and libraries, and compilers, the hardware and equipments that you are using, the installation logs, technical publications, plans, user stories, iteration backlogs, process description, requirements. So all these items, whatever documentation you are doing, architecture documentation and all, so these items you could place under the work products of the project. जो acquired products होते हैं, that may need to be placed under configuration management by both the supplier as well as the project. The supplier agreements must also be there if you want to use any third party control or something like that. So the supplier agreements must also be there. There must be some baseline or method to ensure that the data are complete and the products are also complete and they are sufficing the requirement. Now what is a baseline? Baseline हम किसको कहेंगे? Example of a baseline could include the approved description of a product that contains the version of requirements, the requirement traceability metrics, design discipline, specific items, and end user documentation. So these items we can include in a baseline. And these baselines are added to the configuration management as they are developed. Now the changes to baselines and the release of work products built from the configuration management system are systematically controlled and monitored via the configuration control, change management and the auditing of the function. Now this particular part जहाँ पे कि हम baseline में जो भी changes हैं उनको भी हम note down कर रहे हैं. Let's say if there is some change in the configuration, right, or maybe the product is delivered, some part of the project is complete, so we try to keep on updating the baseline based on that. And this particular process is not specific to the project. This process could be followed across the organization. So configuration management is focused on the control of the managerial and technical aspects of the work. So in agile environments, the configuration management is very much important, because in agile methodology we do frequent changes. We release frequent builds. The baselines are also multiple. We have multiple baselines, and there are multiple workspaces that we need to support. So specific to agile, we might need to customize the agile configuration management process as well. For example, you might need to automate the configuration management. So you need to automate the CM, like create the build script, status accounting, integrity checking, and you need to implement CM as a single set of standards, single set of standard services. At this point, you also need to identify the person who will be responsible for ensuring that the CM is implemented correctly. So whenever you start the configuration management or the agile development, you identify the support needs are confirmed. So as we have seen earlier, there are 3 specific goals and there are practices inside that. The specific goals are establishing the baseline, then track and control changes, and the third one is to establish the integrity. So while establishing the baseline, you focus on practice areas like identify the configuration items and then establish a configuration management system and create or release baseline. In the second goal, that is track and control changes, we track the change request and we control the configuration item. In the third goal of establishing the integrity, we establish configuration management records and we perform configuration audits. Now we will look at some sub-practices of these practices. For example, in establishing the baseline, we try to identify the baseline of work products. We make sure that the baselines of the work products are established. Then there is some practices inside that goal. The first practice is to identify configuration items. The sub practices inside identifying configuration items are to select the configuration items and work products that compose them based on the documented criteria. मतलब आप कॉन्फ़िगरेशन आइटम सिलेक्ट करते हैं और वर्क प्रोडक्ट सिलेक्ट करते हैं जो कि आपकी बेसलाइंस को क्रिएट करते हैं, और वंस दैट इज डन यू डॉक्यूमेंट दोज क्राइटेरिया. The second sub practice is to assign unique identifier to configuration items. आप यूनिक आइडेंटिफायर डिफाइन कर देते हैं फॉर एवरी कॉन्फ़िगरेशन आइटम. The third one is to specify the important characteristics of each configuration item. To try to specify the important characteristics of each configuration item. Okay, so the third part was to specify the important characteristics of each configuration item. जो भी आपके configuration items हैं, उनकी special characteristics क्या हैं, important characteristics क्या हैं of each configuration item. Then you try to specify in the fourth point. You try to specify when each configuration item is placed under configuration management. Configuration item में से कौन सा आइटम हम कॉन्फ़िगरेशन मैनेजमेंट में कब प्लेस कर सकते हैं. जैसे कि जो आपका वर्क प्रोडक्ट है, व्हेन इट विल बी टेस्ट रेडी, यू कैन स्पेसिफाई वेरियस स्टेज ऑफ द प्रोजेक्ट लाइफ साइकिल. In the fifth point, you try to identify the owner responsible for each configuration item. हर configuration item के लिए owner कौन है? You try to in the sixth point, you try to specify relationship among configuration items. फिर जो आपका सिक्स पॉइंट है, इसमें आप जो आपके कॉन्फ़िगरेशन आइटम्स हैं उनमें रिलेशनशिप क्या है. जैसे कि व्हेन योर वर्क प्रोडक्ट विल बी टेस्ट रेडी, इट विल बी रिलीज टू द QA. Once it is tested and approved, it will be available for the next phase and maybe even for the production environment. The second practice is to establish a configuration management system. So, while establishing a configuration management system, there are some sub practices. Like सबसे पहला जो पॉइंट है, establish a mechanism to manage level of control, multiple levels of control. जो आपके कॉन्फ़िगरेशन मैनेजमेंट के आइटम्स हैं, उनको आप कितने लेवल्स पे कंट्रोल कर सकते हैं, डिफरेंट लेवल्स ऑफ कंट्रोल. Then you try to create a mechanism so that the configuration management system is properly authorized. I mean, only the intended user are able to access the configuration management items and also the configuration management system. The third point is to create an ability so that you can store and retrieve the configuration management items in the configuration management system. The fourth point is to share and transfer configuration items between configuration levels in the management system. Suppose there are multiple configuration items and you want to share those items between various control levels. So what is the mechanism required for that? The fifth point is to create an ability for storing and maintaining the version of configuration items. Now the fifth point is to make sure that you have the ability to archive the various versions and also to retrieve them. The seventh point is to make sure that there is an ability for generating various intelligent reports from the management system. The eighth point is to preserve the contents of the configuration. Preserve means you might need to back up and restore the configuration files, the archiving of the files, the recovery of the files. So that comes under the preservation of the contents. The ninth point in this practice is to revise the configuration management structures as necessary. You try to revise the structure. The third practice so the last part of practice 1.2 is to revise the configuration management structures as necessary. The third the third practice is to create or release baselines. So in this particular practice, there are some sub practices like obtain authorization from the CCB before creating or releasing baselines of configuration items. मतलब आपके पास में प्रॉपर ऑथराइजेशन होना चाहिए Secondly is to create or release baselines only from configuration items. जो भी आप बेसलाइन क्रिएट कर रहे हैं वो आपके कॉन्फ़िगरेशन आइटम से ही बन के रिलीज होना चाहिए. द थर्ड पॉइंट इज टू डॉक्यूमेंट द सेट ऑफ कॉन्फ़िगरेशन आइटम्स दैट आर कंटेंट इन अ बेसलाइन. जो भी आपकी बेसलाइंस हैं उसके कॉन्फ़िगरेशन आइटम्स प्रॉपर्ली डॉक्यूमेंट होना चाहिए. एंड द लास्ट पॉइंट इज इन द स्पेसिफिक गोल 1 of identifying the baseline is to make the current set of baselines readily available. जो भी आपकी baselines है वो readily available होना चाहिए. Thank you. Okay, so now let's talk about the specific goal 2 of configuration management. In specific goal 2, we track and control the changes. सो बेसिकली इस पर्टिकुलर गोल से आप क्या टारगेट करते हैं कि जो भी आपके वर्क प्रोडक्ट्स में चेंजेस आएंगे, दोज चेंजेस मस्ट बी ट्रैक्ड एंड कंट्रोल्ड यूजिंग द कॉन्फ़िगरेशन मैनेजमेंट. एंड द स्पेसिफिक प्रैक्टिसेस and the specific practices under this goal must maintain the baselines also. So after you establish the baselines, those baselines must be specifically maintained in this particular goal area. The first practice under this goal is to track change request. So we try to track the change request for all configuration items in this particular goal. Change request में सिर्फ हम जो change requirements आई हैं या जो चेंजेस हमने किए हैं सिर्फ वही ट्रैक नहीं करते हैं, बट वी ऑल्सो ट्राई टू ट्रैक द डिफेक्ट्स एंड द इम्पैक्ट ऑफ दोज डिफेक्ट्स. The failures, if let's say if we defined a work product to integrate a third party component, but for some reasons that assumption failed. So while tracking the change request, we track it. We mentioned that change also. And the sub practices under this particular practice is to initiate and record change request in the change request database. जो भी आपकी change request है उसको आप एक change request database में नोट डाउन करेंगे. Then we try to analyze the impact of changes and fixes proposed in change request. फिर जो change request आपने नोट डाउन करी हैं डेटाबेस में, उन change request का आप impact evaluate करेंगे. You try to evaluate the impact of that change request. And then you try to make sure that the change that you are going to do in the system are consistent with all technical and project requirements. So let's say if this particular application is connecting with other applications also, so those impacts also you measure under this particular practice area. Once that is done, you try to prioritize and categorize your change request. इसमें जो भी आपकी इमरजेंसी रिक्वायरमेंट्स हैं वो आप पहले करने का ट्राई करते हैं, एंड फर्स्ट ऑफ ऑल यू ट्राई टू कैटेगराइज देम कि दीज आर इमरजेंसी रिक्वेस्ट. Then if the action is needed urgently, then there must be a emergency authority to handle the execution of that request. So emergency authority must evaluate and approve that request. The fourth sub-practice in this is to review the change request. To be evaluated or executed in the next baseline. So whenever you have defined your baseline, you must make sure that these change requests are handled in the next baseline or next area that you have defined. The fifth point is to track the status of change request to closure. You track the status of change request. जो भी आपका change request है, you track the status of that. Next practice area is the control configuration items. So in control configuration items, you control the changes to the configuration items. So जो भी आपका product baseline है, you try to maintain a proper control on those change requests, on those configuration items. जैसे कि आपका रिवीजन हिस्ट्री हो गया या बेसलाइंस हो गए, आर्काइव्स हो गए. सो these are handled in this particular practice. The sub practice or sub steps involved in this practice is to control changes to configuration items throughout the life of the product or service. जो भी आपकी configuration item में changes हैं, उसको आप throughout the life of the product उसको आप handle करते हैं. Next subject is to obtain appropriate authorization before change items are handled. मैकेनिज्म होना चाहिए so that एंटर होने से पहले वो चेंजेस आर ट्रैक प्रॉपर्ली. Practice is to configuration items in the configuration management system. Then in the next sub practice, you do various checks to ensure that changes must not cause any unintended effects. For example, the changes must not end in some security holes in the system. So some security measures and everything, all these controller mechanisms must be taken care of. In the fifth sub-practice, you record the changes to configuration items and reasons for changes as required. In service goal 3, we establish the integrity in the system. We try to establish integrity. So as service goal 3 of configuration management is to establish integrity. So in this particular goal, we want to make sure that the integrity of baselines is maintained and established properly throughout the life cycle of the project. And after that, the baselines are, there must be a system to archive those baselines. So yes, so the first practice in establishing the integrity is to establish configuration management record. जो आपके configuration management के records हैं, those records must be established. जैसे कि आपका configuration items का revision history हो गया, change log हो गया, request records हो गया. So these things must be taken care of. The sub practice is, in this particular practice area is to, there are some 5-6 sub practices. So the first sub practice is to record the configuration management actions in sufficient detail. जो भी आपके कॉन्फ़िगरेशन से रिलेटेड एक्शंस आप परफॉर्म करने वाले हैं, वो इसमें आप रिकॉर्ड करते हैं विथ प्रॉपर डिटेल्स, so that the status and contents of each item is available and also the previous versions can be recovered. The next sub practice is to ensure that relevant stakeholders have access to and knowledge of the configuration. जो भी stakeholders हैं जो कि इस particular configuration item से connected हैं, they must have all the required details, they must have all the knowledge and required access to view and check the status of the configuration items. The third practice area, the third sub practice is to specify the latest version of baseline. Baseline का जो भी आपका latest version है, you try to configure that, you try to manage the latest version of the baseline. और configuration items में जो भी आपके वर्शंस आपने आइडेंटिफाई किए हैं, इस पर्टिकुलर बेसलाइन को बनाने के लिए दोस मस्ट बी हैंडल्ड प्रॉपरली. सक्सेसिव बेसलाइंस में जो डिफरेंस है वो इसमें आप टाइट डाउन करते हैं. एंड लास्टली यू ट्राई टू रिवाइज द स्टेटस एंड हिस्ट्री ऑफ ईच कॉन्फ़िगरेशन आइटम्स एज नेसेसरी. हर बेसलाइन का स्टेटस और हिस्ट्री आप मेंटेन करते हैं. The second practice is to perform configuration audits. Configuration audits में आप बेसिकली यही करते हैं कि जो भी आपकी configuration baselines हैं, you try to maintain the integrity of configuration baseline and you are also able to perform a configuration audit on your configuration baselines. जैसे कि आपके एक्शन आइटम्स हो गए या ऑडिट रिजल्ट्स हो गए. So these are some of the examples of this particular practice area. One of the sub practices in this area is to access the integrity of baselines. तो जो भी आपकी बेसलाइंस हैं उनकी इंटीग्रिटी को आप इसमें असेस करते हैं. सेकेंडली आप मेक श्योर करते हैं कि जो कॉन्फ़िगरेशन आइटम्स आपने आइडेंटिफाई किए हैं ये आपके मैनेजमेंट रिकॉर्ड्स में करेक्टली नोटेड है. थर्डली you try to review the structure and integrity of items in the configuration management system. जो भी configuration management system में आपके आइटम्स की इंटीग्रिटी और स्ट्रक्चर हैं वो आप मेक श्योर करते हैं कि उसका प्रॉपर मैनेजमेंट हुआ है कि नहीं हुआ है. फोर्थली यू कंफर्म द कंप्लीटनेस करेक्टनेस ऑफ आइटम्स इन द मैनेजमेंट सिस्टम. जो मैनेजमेंट सिस्टम में आपके आइटम्स हैं वो कंप्लीट और करेक्ट हैं कि नहीं है. एंड दिस इज ट्रैक्ड अगेंस्ट द रिक्वायरमेंट स्पेसिफिकेशन. द फिफ्थ सब प्रैक्टिस इज टू जो भी आपके कॉन्फ़िगरेशन मैनेजमेंट सिस्टम के स्टैंडर्ड्स और प्रोसीजर्स आपने डिफ़ाइन किए हुए हैं तो जो आपका कंप्लायंस है ये उससे मैच होना चाहिए. इट डजेंट मैटर यू आर फॉलोइंग एजाइल और टेस्ट ड्रिवन डेवलपमेंट और PMI प्रोजेक्ट मैनेजमेंट प्रैक्टिसेस, बट वॉट एवर प्रैक्टिसेस यू हैव डिफाइंड इट मस्ट कंप्लाई विथ दोज प्रैक्टिसेस. And the last sub practice in configuration management is to track the action items from closer to audit. Audit से लेके closer तक जितने भी आपके action items हैं उनको सबको आप ट्रैक करके और अपने पास में स्टोर करके रखते हैं. So that's all from configuration management point of view. Thank you.